Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots, the Spectator's daily politics podcast. I'm Oscar Edmondson and I'm joined today by James Heal and Tom Gross, a commentator on the Middle East. Now, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu, his former defence minister U.S Galant, as well as separately for Hamas military leader Mohammed Daif. They are all wanted for alleged war crimes, but specifically regarding Netanyahu and Galant, the ICC say that each bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts. Now, Netanyahu dismisses this as false, but Tom, I wanted to start with you and get your understanding of why you think these warrants have been issued now.
Well, there are several different theories as to why now. One of them is that the two Israelis who've been indicted, who are Netanyahu and the former defense minister Galant, they do not include two other Israelis, generals who were part of the war cabinet at the time the period in which was investigated, which was up to May this year. Those are Benny Gantz and Gabi Eisenkot, who resigned from the government. And both Gantz and Eisenkot are kind of on the left of Israeli politics. And some people are saying it's a political move to try drive Netanyahu from the Likud party, which is center-right, out of office. And they're saying, well, why did you indict those two and not Gantz and Eisenkot?
And Tom, we've seen continued protests in Israel against Netanyahu, notably as well after he fired Galant as his defence minister. So how do these arrest warrants impact his position and what will be the political ramifications for him?
Well, almost everyone has rallied around Netanyahu in Israel. And to remind people, Netanyahu is, unpopular among many. If there was an election held today, he would probably lose it. And yet, this is viewed as an assault not on Netanyahu, but on the entire Israeli population. Even Israeli Arab leaders are now battling Netanyahu on this point. There is a kind of men going round on Facebook saying, Je suis Bibi. I am Bibi, after Je suis Charlie Hebdo and others. In other words, even the political opponents of Netanyahu on the left, or President Herzog, who's not a member, he was the leader of the Israeli Labour Party, are 100% behind Netanyahu, because this is not viewed as some kind of legitimate criticism. This is viewed, to quote Netanyahu himself, as some kind of equivalent of a modern-day Dreyfus trial. I'm sure everyone remembers what the Dreyfus trial was more than 100 years ago in France, where a Jewish French officer was convicted on basis of what later proved to be lies. And Émile Zola, the great French writer, wrote his famous J'accuse.
And James, switching then to the UK, which is a signatory to the ICC, what do you think are the broader implications of these warrants when it comes to relations between the UK and Israel?
Well, it's very difficult because the UK under Keir Starmer has repeatedly promised to stick to whatever the ICC decides to do, which effectively is a legal blank check. And so what you had is a Financial Times interview last month with Richard Hermer, Keir Starmer's handpicked choice for Attorney General, who we had a profile of in the magazine last week, very much a close ally and someone who Starmer has known for sort of 30 years or so. He has made it very clear they would stick to the ICC. David Lammy also reiterated that same commitment. And now, of course, they're in a bit of a jam because they've got this judgment that's been reached, and it means that, for instance, yesterday at the Number 10 lobby briefing, it was a very difficult session for the Prime Minister's spokesman because they suggested that there would be a domestic legal process to decide whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu would be arrested if he landed in London. Of course, when this was asked, what would this actually entail, they couldn't really answer. And then on the media round this morning, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, who'd thought would be in charge of law enforcement policing in this country, said that there wasn't one for her. So she refused to give any clarity. It was a really difficult one right now. Obviously, you're about to see a change of president in America. You're going to have Donald Trump coming in, and the US is very much against this decision that's been reached today. I do think so. It's a very difficult one for Labour. Obviously, they're concerned about sort of domestic political ramifications in terms of voters, but also what they've said previously. I think Keir Starmer very much has a doctrine of legalism when it comes to how the UK should be regarded in international institutions. The danger is, of course, is that international institutions are by no means perfect, often reach decisions which are very political. I don't think there's a sort of clear distinction between politics and law as some sort of make out. And for me, this is an echo, I think, of the handling of the Chagos Islands, which of course ignores many basic facts about how in which that was conducted, some of the revelations that have come out about the Russian government, for instance. So I do think it's going to cause a lot of issues for Labour, not least because more broadly, obviously, this is going to be a conflict that carries to go on. It looks to carry on for many more months at least. And also, of course, what it means for relations via the international institutions, who now potentially will see the UK as a political actor, which will sign up to everything they want to go along with.
And by the way, other countries, maybe with more backbone than Keir Starmer, are rallying to Israel's support. For example, the Argentinian president today said he would invite Netanyahu. The Hungarian leader Orban also said he would invite Netanyahu, as opposed to people like President Macron, and indeed, dare I say it, countries in Western Europe with populations who they're trying to appease. Also, of course, Labour lost seats in the recent general election to Gaza candidates. So I'm sure that Keir Starmer, like Macron and others, are looking over their shoulders for domestic political reasons. And this has got nothing to do with international law, because this court is undoubtedly biased, and it's in fact preposterous, the judgment or the arrest warrants.
So where do you expect the US then to fall on this? How does Donald Trump complicate things?
Well, it complicates it a lot because you have senior Republicans saying that they will take action against any country that makes an attempt to abide by this decision. So you have Mike Waltz, who is the nominee for the National Security Advisor. He today said action is coming against the International Criminal Court. You have Senator Lindsey Graham saying he's going to introduce a bill that will sanction any country that aids and abets decisions like this by the ICC. You have Senator Tom Cotton also threatening. So, I think one thing we say about Donald Trump is he often means what he says. So, this is not because those senators care so much about Israel. It's because they see this decision by the ICC to indict a democratic leader as an assault on all democracies, which will eventually be used against the United States and indeed Britain. It's a slippery slope. Just to remind people, the idea of the ICC is to bring to justice leaders of dictatorships that cannot be brought to justice through domestic independent courts. Now, not only does Israel have a vibrant democracy and a very assertive independent court, the previous prime minister who served for any length of time before Netanyahu, that would be Ehud Olmert, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison for what is actually, in the scheme of things, quite a minor act of corruption, equivalent to some of the things that British politicians are often accused of but not charged with. So, you have a former prime minister, Olmert, sentenced to prison in Israel. You have a former president, Katsav, sentenced to prison, by the way, by an Arab justice, an Israeli Arab justice, who was chair of this Israeli Supreme Court at the time. So Israel has a robust independent judiciary. The whole point of this court was to bring to justice real war criminals in certain third world countries where there is no independent judicial system. And for that reason, the Americans are furious with the court for these indictments.
Just to add, I think this is going to be a constant theme of the next 4 years or so. Criticism of the international institutions that were largely set up in the kind of post-war era in terms of both conventions, things like the ECHR here in the UK, also international organisations like the ICC in America, because the criticism that they will face is about these organisations have deviated from their original purpose. They're no longer actually being used to target those sort of despots and dictatorships, as Tom says, but actually have now over time either lost their purpose or been subverted from the original purpose. And I think that is a critique the Trump government will very much, and its allies on the Hill, will continue push. And you can see that on a very small level by the Steerpike article we published today, talking about congressional Republicans criticising some of the EU and UK's acts on free speech. So I think all these different things are going to be all part of a general pattern. And I question whether, as well as the decision, which there's a lot of grounds to criticise on, Keir Starmer saying they're going along with the ICC, I suspect that kind of throwback to an era of post-war institutions is going to be something on which he finds himself very isolated in the years ahead.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, James. And thank you very much for listening.